You know the scene. You're scrolling through your feed, right? Vacation photos, big announcements, little daily updates. It's just this constant river of people sharing their lives. But then you think of that one person, that friend who's always online, always watches your stories, but they never, ever post a thing. Well, let's get into that. It's kind of the modern mystery, isn't it? In a world that's basically yelling at us to share everything all the time, their silence is, well, it's loud. And it's easy to make snap judgments. But what if that silence isn't what we think it is? What if it's actually a sign of something much, much deeper?
And this is where it gets really fascinating, this huge gap between what we assume and what's actually going on psychologically. We might think, oh, they're just shy, or maybe even a little boring. But psychology points to a totally different story, a story about being self-aware, private, and incredibly emotionally secure.
So let's just bust this myth of the invisible user wide open. We're about to uncover the hidden strengths behind this very deliberate digital silence, and it all starts with one major reason. It really begins with a powerful desire for privacy. For these people, their personal space, both in the real world and the digital one, is something to be protected, not something to be performed for an audience of hundreds. And this is such a key distinction. It's not that they're against being social, it's that they are for having personal boundaries. They choose very carefully what the world gets to see, which means they stay in control of their own story. So here's the bottom line. Their satisfaction comes from inside, not from external stuff like likes and comments. Their self-worth isn't on the line with every post they don't make because it was never tied to posting to begin with. In fact, psychologists often see this as a really powerful sign of self-love. And this preference for privacy, it's usually built on top of something even deeper. It's often rooted in a very strong and very stable sense of self. It's as simple and as profound as that. They just know who they are. Research into self-concept actually shows that people who share less online often have a more grounded understanding of themselves, one that doesn't depend on what other people think. So what does that actually look like day to day? Well, it means knowing your own values, your own goals, without needing a crowd to cheer you on. It means you're way less likely to get swept up in every viral trend because your sense of direction comes from an internal compass, not an external algorithm. And all of this, it all ties into a really deep emotional security. I mean, think about it. If you already feel whole, you don't need to post a selfie to prove your value. You don't need the world to validate your experiences because you already know they matter to you. Okay, so this brings us to another super fascinating layer here. These silent users are often deep thinkers who are just incredibly aware of the huge difference between the digital world and the real one. There's a cool psychological concept for this. It's called an internal locus of evaluation. I know, it's a mouthful, but it's a simple, powerful idea. It just means you are your own judge. You measure yourself against your own standards, not the crazy, constantly changing standards of social media. Because they have that internal compass, they're way better at avoiding the trap of what psychologists call social comparison theory. This is our natural tendency to measure our worth against others. And on social media, this can become so dangerous because we're not even comparing ourselves to reality anymore. And this is the core of the problem, right? We end up comparing our messy, complex, behind-the-scenes life with someone else's perfectly polished, curated highlight reel. Silent users, they just see that game for what it is and choose not to play. So you see, their choice to stay silent isn't passive. It's not weakness. It's actually an active, really smart decision to step away from that exhausting, endless cycle of comparison and, in doing so, protect their own mental peace. So when we put all these pieces together, the privacy, the self-awareness, that emotional security, we land on a new, really powerful definition of what confidence looks like in our digital age. The big takeaway is this. They don't need the constant performance. They don't need the likes or the shares. They just don't need to be seen in that digital spotlight in order to feel important. Their sense of value, their identity, it all comes from within. And that right there, that quiet, stable self-assurance that doesn't need a spotlight to know its own worth, well, according to psychology, that is true confidence. So the next time you scroll past that silent profile, you might see it a little differently. Not as emptiness, but as a quiet kind of strength. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. In a world that screams for attention, what's the power you can find in your own silence?